My name is Leora Brandt, but I've always felt more like a shadow than a person. In our Virginia house, there wasn't a single hallway that didn't echo with my sister Marin's name. Her piano trophies lined the mantel like golden soldiers. Her prom photos, her honor roll certificates, even the ridiculous spelling bee ribbon she won in second grade, they were framed and centered like museum pieces. And me, I was somewhere in the corners, a blurry figure in the background of family pictures. The kid who smiled too quietly and learned how to take up as little room as possible. Marin was 6 years older. That might not sound like much now, but when you're growing up, it's everything. By the time I was old enough to spell my name, she was already winning essay contests and giving valedictorian speeches. I watched from the back rows of crowded auditoriums as Mom beamed and Dad stood clapping with red-rimmed eyes like she'd just won the Nobel Prize. No one ever asked what I was interested in. I drew pictures, lots of them, covered my notebooks in characters and sketches, stories that danced in my head when real life felt too small. Once, when I was around 11, I worked up the courage to show a few to the family during dinner. I remember it so clearly. Marin was talking about some choir solo she'd landed, and I waited for a pause, just a sliver of silence to slide my sketch pad onto the table. "Hey," I said too softly. "I made these this week for English class. We had to write and draw a story." Marin barely glanced down. "Cool," she said, then turned back to Mom. "Anyway, my music teacher said I might be good enough for state-level competitions." Dad chuckled. "Of course you are, sweetheart. We've always said you were our little prodigy." I left my drawings on the table. No one touched them. Later, I threw them in the trash. That's how it was. Marin lit up every room, and I learned how to dim myself to make space for her. I wore her hand-me-downs even when they didn't fit. Slept in her old bed once she moved out. Lived a life 2 steps behind her footprints, pretending it didn't hurt to always be the afterthought. In high school, I stopped trying. What was the point? Even when I graduated, walked across the stage in a borrowed dress, no one cheered as loud as they had for Marin. My mom took a few photos. My dad gave me a one-armed hug. Then we went to dinner and spent most of the time talking about how Marin's college roommate had just gotten engaged. I told myself it didn't matter. That college would be my fresh start, a place where no one knew I was the second daughter. But that was before Marin came home one Sunday, eyes glowing, and said the words that would send our whole house spinning into orbit. Marin didn't just announce her engagement, she performed it. She twirled into the living room with her hand held high, diamond, flashing like a warning flare. I said yes. She squealed, breathless with excitement. Mom shrieked and launched forward, already crying. Dad laughed like he'd won the lottery. Within minutes, champagne bottles were popped, phone calls were made, and the dining table was covered in magazines for wedding venues and dress catalogs. I stood in the corner with a half-eaten apple in my hand, forgotten. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning, and somehow our entire house was transformed into Marin's wedding headquarters. My mom's voice echoed through the halls on speakerphone with caterers and photographers. My dad began working overtime. I asked once if he was stressed. He smiled tiredly. "It's your sister's big day. We're not going to hold back." Late one night, I passed the kitchen on my way to the bathroom and paused when I heard them whispering. "We'll need to take out a loan," Dad said, rubbing his face. "That vineyard venue's non-refundable." Mom sighed. "She deserves it, Ellis. She's waited her whole life for this." I stood quietly in the dark hallway, listening to them make sacrifices for her dreams, like it was a sacred duty. I thought about what it would feel like to have people bend over backwards for something I wanted, to be met with joy, not hesitation, to be celebrated for simply asking. The wedding was everything she wanted. Soft pinks, gold accents, string quartet. She looked like a page out of a bridal magazine. People said she glowed. I just felt like I was fading. I smiled in pictures. I fluffed her dress. I held her bouquet when she got tired, and when someone asked if I was her sister, I said yes, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. After the honeymoon, we had another Sunday dinner. Marin waltzed in late, plopped her purse down, and said, "I've decided to be a stay-at-home wife. Jack makes more than enough." Our parents exchanged a look, brief, tight, but their mouths formed smiles almost immediately. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said. If it makes you happy, that's what matters. I chewed slowly, staring at my plate, trying not to scream. They'd gone into debt to give her a wedding fit for royalty, and now she was leaving her job without a second thought. No one asked if she'd thought it through. No one questioned if it was wise. They just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. I cleared the dishes while they all drank coffee and talked about baby names. A month after Marin announced she was pregnant, I finally worked up the courage to ask. It was after dinner. Mom was assembling a scrapbook of Marin's ultrasound photos. Dad was watching golf with the sound low. I cleared my throat hard in my mouth. I've been looking at colleges, I said. I really want to start in the fall. Mom barely looked up. That's nice, honey. I was wondering if maybe you could help with tuition. They glanced at each other in exchange I'd seen too many times. Silent calculations. Quiet avoidance. Well, Dad said after a beat we'd love to, but with the loan for Marin's wedding and the down payment on their house. We can cover half Mom cut in, but you'll need to figure out the rest on your own. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay, thanks. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, numb. Half. After everything they'd poured into Marin's life, every sacrifice, every blank check, this was all they could offer me. I applied to the nearest community college. It wasn't my dream school, but it was what I could afford. I picked up a job at a 24-hour diner off Route 29. The pay was lousy, but the tips were decent when the truckers rolled through late at night. Most shifts I kept my head down, poured coffee, took orders, smiled when it was expected. But there was one customer, Ms. Carroll, who came in like clockwork every Wednesday at 10:15 p.m. She ordered the same thing, black coffee blueberry pie, no ice in her water. She always sat in the same booth, always left a $10 tip on a $6 tab. You've got kind eyes, kid, she told me once, scribbling in the margins of a newspaper. Don't let 'em go dull just 'cause the world doesn't clap for you yet. I blinked at her, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to me before, especially not someone who wasn't obligated to. After that, I started looking forward to Wednesdays. It was the only part of the week that didn't feel like survival, and I clung to it, especially once Marin's twins arrived and the weekends stopped being mine at all. The first time Marin dropped the twins off, it felt like a one-time favor. She showed up on a Friday afternoon, her hair frizzy and her eyes wild. I just need a couple of hours, she said, unbuckling the toddlers and handing them over before I could even close the front door. Jack and I haven't had a moment to breathe since they were born. I hesitated. I've got a shift tonight. You're good with them, Leora, she said already, halfway back to the car. Please. I canceled my shift and spent the evening covered in applesauce and tears, some theirs, some mine. But that was just the beginning. Every weekend after that, she dropped them off. Sometimes she said it was errands. Other times, it was self-care. Occasionally, she didn't even give a reason. The front door would open, chaos would roll in, and she'd disappear with a wave and a vague promise to be back soon. I tried to speak up. I really did. One Saturday, after barely sleeping through a week of midterms and working back-to-back shifts, I snapped. Marin, I said, standing in front of the door as she tried to leave. I can't keep doing this. I'm drowning here. I have school, work. I'm exhausted. She froze, purse half zipped. Her face crumpled, and for a second I saw something raw underneath all the gloss. You think I'm not exhausted? She whispered. Do you think I wanted any of this Jack's barely home? The boys don't nap. I haven't worn real clothes in months. No one asks how I'm doing, they just expect me to be grateful. I stared at her stunned. She looked just as trapped as I felt, but then she squared her shoulders. You're not a mom, Leora. You don't understand. You'll help right. Just for a little while. And just like that, it was back on me. I turned to our parents later that evening, voice shaking. I need some space. I need time to study, to sleep. Dad didn't even lower his paper. Your sister needs help. Be glad you can give it. Mom sighed. Don't be selfish, Leora. You'll have kids of your own someday, you'll understand. I didn't know what was worse, the guilt or how familiar it felt. So I folded. I kept showing up, bottle warming, diaper changing, cartoon playing. Weekends stopped belonging to me. Everything did. I spent 6 months scraping together enough money for 3 nights in Myrtle Beach. It wasn't glamorous. The motel had dated floral curtains and sand stuck in the lobby carpet, but it was a block from the ocean and it was mine. I'd booked it myself, paid with my own tips, and counted the days like a prisoner crossing off calendar marks on a cell wall. When the bus finally pulled in and I stepped off, salt hit my skin like a baptism. For once, I didn't hear crying kids or clanging dishes just to the ocean. I checked in, dropped my bag, and changed into the one swimsuit I owned. I didn't care that it was faded. I was here. I was free. I came back from my first walk on the beach, glowing my flip-flops still dusted with sand. That's when I saw them, Mom, Marin, and the twins outside the motel room next door. 2 big roller bags sat beside them. The boys were already chasing seagulls in the parking lot. "What? What are you doing here?" I asked, voice tight. Mom beamed. "We thought it'd be fun to surprise you. Family trip." "But how did you—" "Oh, Marin saw the email confirmation on the kitchen counter," she said, brushing it off. "We didn't want you to be alone." I looked at their room. It was clearly an upgraded suite balcony ocean view, big enough for all of them. My room was a converted storage unit with mismatched towels and one flickering lamp. Before I could process the sting, Marin was already pushing the twins toward me. "They've been dying to see the beach," she said. "You don't mind watching them, right? Jack and I want to take a long walk. Maybe hit that new oyster bar. I need to grab some snacks," Mom added. "And sunscreen. We'll be back soon." And just like that, they were gone. I stood there while the boys tugged at my arms, laughing and screaming. My room turned into a jungle gym. They smeared juice on the sheets, broke a lamp-flushed apple slices down the toilet. I spent the second night on the phone with maintenance and paid out of pocket for a plumber. By the end of day 3, I was more tired than I'd ever been. My skin burned, my patience frayed, and my wallet emptier than when I arrived. When Marin complained that she was exhausted from all the traveling, something inside me cracked open. The moment I walked back through our front door, the exhaustion hit me like a wave. I dropped my bag by the stairs and headed straight for my room, ignoring the blur of the television and the way Dad barely glanced up from his recliner. I collapsed onto my bed without even changing. My legs ached, my shoulders were stiff, and my bank account was down to single digits. I hadn't had a single uninterrupted night of sleep since the trip started, and all I'd wanted was 3 quiet days by the water. Instead, I came back with a sunburn, a migraine, and a bill for a broken motel lamp. I don't know what exactly snapped the next morning. Maybe it was the sound of my mom's voice echoing through the house like nothing had happened. Maybe it was the text from Marin asking if I could do next weekend too. Maybe it was just the silence that came after too much noise. I pulled out my duffel and started packing. The door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Mom stood there, her arms crossed, disbelief painted across her face. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "I'm moving out." Her mouth dropped open. "You're being dramatic." Dad's voice boomed from the hallway. "If you walk out that door, you're on your own. No help with school." "Nothing." I hesitated, my fingers curled around the zipper of the duffel. Part of me faltered just for a second until my mind snapped back to finals week. I saw the image like it was happening all over again, one of the twins dumping juice on my laptop, then hitting the keyboard with a toy truck while I cried quietly in the corner. I zipped the bag shut. "I'd rather struggle on my own," I said, "than keep living like this." "After everything we've done for you," Mom whispered, eyes glassy. "No," I said. "Everything you've done for Marin." They shouted more as I walked down the stairs. Accusations, warnings, pleas. But I didn't stop. At the front door, I paused. My hand hovered on the knob. "If you leave now," Mom said behind me, voice cracking, "don't bother coming back." I opened the door. The light hit my face like a slap and a promise all at once. I stepped through and didn't look back. For the first 2 weeks, I slept on Danny's couch. She never made me feel like a burden, just handed me a pillow, a blanket, and a pair of keys. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours while you figure things out." I figured things out $1 at a time. I picked up every shift I could at the diner. When I wasn't working, I was cramming for midterms at the back booth, nursing cold coffee and pretending my ankles didn't hurt. A girl from my study group, Jo, mentioned she was looking for a roommate. We toured a tiny second-floor apartment that smelled faintly of mildew but had good light and a door that locked. We signed the lease 2 days later. My bed was a mattress on the floor. My desk was a cardboard box turned sideways. The first thing I bought with my tips from a particularly chaotic Saturday shift was a little yellow lamp from a thrift store down the block. It was chipped on one side, the switch wobbled, but when I plugged it in, the room felt like mine. I learned how to stretch spaghetti for 3 nights in a row, how to patch holes in jeans, how to cry in the shower without anyone hearing. I missed meals. I pulled all-nighters. I spent hours staring at numbers trying to make rent and tuition live on the same page. But the silence at night belonged to me. The air, the exhaustion, even the fear, they were mine. No one banging on the door. No twins. No guilt. Just the dull glow of that lamp by my mattress and the sound of my own breathing. And then before I could catch my breath, my birthday rolled around. I hadn't expected anything for my 25th. So when Mom called a week before and said, "We're doing a little get-together. Just family. You should come." I hesitated, then said yes. A part of me was curious. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe this was the olive branch. The house looked the same. The walls still lined with photos of Marin and her boys like I'd never lived there. But the greetings were warm, the food familiar, and for a moment I let myself soften. After cake, Mom handed me a white envelope with a gold bow. "This is from all of us," she said, smiling too wide. Inside was a printed itinerary 5 days in the Florida Keys. Flights, hotel, all paid for. Dad clapped my back. A family vacation. Finally. My stomach turned. Before I could speak, my younger cousin wandered by, licking frosting off his thumb. "Aunt Chandra said the grown-ups are going to do spa days while you watch the kids at the pool." He said, then scampered off. Of course. I looked back down at the envelope. The hotel was a family resort. The room listed under my name had 2 twin beds. Marin grinned. "The boys are already so excited. They've been talking about Auntie Leora's beach day all week." I nodded slowly, forcing my face to stay neutral while my hands curled into fists inside my lap. "Thank you," I said quietly, folding the paper back into the envelope. No one noticed the edge crumple under my grip. They thought they'd trapped me again. But this time I had a plan. At the airport, I smiled through the check-in process, nodding as Marin listed all the activities she'd planned for the boys. As we neared the gate, I clutched my tote and said, "I need the restroom. Be right back." I turned the corner, heart pounding. For a moment, I froze. My hand hovered over my phone. Then I opened my notes app and reread the line I'd typed after Myrtle Beach. "I am not a nursery." That was enough. I walked calmly to gate 42 and handed over my separate ticket, one I'd bought weeks ago, to a quiet resort town where no one knew my name. As I settled into my seat and the wheels lifted from the ground, I raised my glass of cheap champagne and typed a final message. "I'm not coming. Enjoy your trip." Then I turned off my phone and leaned into the hum of distance. They showed up less than 24 hours after I got back. I opened the door to Mom, already mid-sentence, voice sharp and shaking. Marin stood behind her arms, crossed, face red. "You humiliated us," Mom snapped. "The boys were crying. We had to rearrange everything." Marin stepped forward. "You just left," she said, quieter. "You didn't even say goodbye." I let them rant. Accusations tumbled out like broken glass, selfish, irresponsible, ungrateful. I stood still, arms folded across my chest, until their noise finally ran out of steam. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, voice even. "Until you treat me like a person, not a free service, we're done." Mom's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." I turned toward the door. "You need to leave." For a second, Marin's eyes flickered, just a brief softness, something almost like understanding. But she said nothing. She turned and followed Mom out. I closed the door behind them and slid the lock into place. It's been 7 months. The studio's small, but it fits me. Mornings start with sunlight through sheer curtains and the sound of the Riverwalk below. I water my balcony plants and leave the door open when I paint. Last week I got a postcard in the mail. No return address, just Ms. Carroll's looping handwriting. "You were always more than they saw." I smiled and pinned it to the fridge. No one calls me selfish here. No one hands me screaming toddlers or expects me to disappear. I used to beg to be included. Now I build a life no one else gets to rewrite.